This week on In Alignment, we're joined by Chelsea, a DJ, activist, and the founder of Looni, and one of the most thoughtful voices in women's health today. After navigating epilepsy, endometriosis, pregnancy loss, and years of being failed by the medical system, Chelsea turned her own healing journey into a platform transforming how women understand hormonal health. This conversation goes far beyond wellness trends. We talk about medical gaslighting, chronic stress, community as medicine, and what it actually looks like to support women at the root. Chelsea is a force, and this episode is incredible. Welcome to In Alignment. I'm Annie.
And I'm Marissa. You were meant to find this today, and we're so glad you're here.
Welcome to In Alignment, Chelsea. We are so excited to have you here today. We'd love to start off with your journey. You navigated epilepsy, endometriosis, pregnancy loss. You now are the founder of a women's health company. We want to hear about your story and what led you to where you are today.
Thank you both so much for having me. It is an honor to be here and to be having this conversation. And in terms of my story, it's always interesting when I kind of look back and reflect, just because I guess the biggest challenges of my life and my journey with my own health have sort of really shaped, the trajectory of my career and where I landed today. And if you had said to me, 20 years ago that my hardship would end up, in a way being somewhat of a gift and shaping the outcome and the choices that I made around, a business that I was building, I probably wouldn't have believed you. And so it's always nice to kind of reflect and just like remind myself, but for anyone who's listening, that sometimes like our biggest challenges can often become our strength in a way, and really shape who we are. So in terms of, my journey, I guess, started off in music as a DJ, predominantly working in the fashion and art space, a million miles away from a women's health company is, Looni, as you mentioned, and a hormonal health and wellness company that I co-founded with Tatiana Steele, my amazing co-founder. And in terms of my health journey, I moved to the US. I was about 19 years old. I'd been diagnosed with a type of epilepsy known as juvenile myoclonic epilepsy, JME, when I was about 15 years old. And I'd started having seizures at about the age of 13. I guess it hit me pretty hard, the diagnosis, and my family, particularly my mum, because I actually have an older sister, Tamsin, who has a more severe form of epilepsy. So we have the same condition, but, wildly different in terms of the severity. And my sister Tamsin lives in full-time care in the Epilepsy Society. And from a very early age, she'd been having seizures. Unfortunately, my sister's quality of life isn't that good because severe frontal lobe brain damage from all of the seizures that she has. And that's really, really impacted her cognition and her neurological development. So I have been the cognitively healthy sister up until this age. And so it was this real bomb that was dropped on my family, because it was like, hey, wait, I'm healthy. It was kind of like it came out of nowhere and seemed so strange. We start having seizures at this age, which we now, of course, know is specific to this type of epilepsy, where the onset is usually during the teenage years. So, I started having seizures. I was put on a lot of different anticonvulsant medicines that had a lot of side effects. The objective at that point is, how do we quell the seizures? And that becomes, I guess the sort of primary focus and goal. But oftentimes, I guess the other comorbidities of the condition and the way that the medication impacts you becomes not even a conversation, and sort of secondary to that. And so, I was really impacted negatively by the medication that I was on. I moved to New York. It was a lot to navigate, as I'm sure you can imagine, because I was a teen, coming out of teenage years. I started DJing a couple of years into living in New York, which was amazing and such an incredible path. And I feel, still so grateful for that journey. But it was challenging. It was challenging with epilepsy. My condition is really impacted by stress, sleep deprivation, alcohol, all of the things that at that age, you kind of want to do, you know, like you want to stay up all night and you want to drink alcohol like your friends, and you're going to get stressed and all of the things. And so that was really, really hard. And at the same time, I was struggling with pretty intense periods. So my menstrual cycle regular, but I was just, completely um, overcome with pain during my cycle. So, I had pain during ovulation. I had severe chronic pain during menstruation. I had pain during intercourse. I had a lot of fatigue. I had a lot of mood issues, in kind of like the lead up to my period. And honestly, I hate to say this, but my experience with my period and my journey, which resulted in a diagnosis of endometriosis, which was 10 years after, all of this pain, my journey and my experience is not unique. Like you hear that as somebody that perhaps doesn't have endo and you think, gosh, how did it take 10 years to diagnose this condition? But that is on par with the average diagnosis time. My story matches many other women. And in fact, many other women out there will tell you that it took them 25 years, 30 years to get a diagnosis. So, what did that look like? It was years and years of repeatedly going to my OB, to my general practitioner, complaining about pain, complaining about all of these symptoms that I was experiencing, and just being told that these were painful periods. Painful periods were normal, and kind of packaged up in this is part and parcel of being a woman. And it really starts to, I guess, play on your own sanity when you're not feeling seen or acknowledged and your pain is not being, validated. And feel free to interrupt me because I can ramble about my story for a long time, but it ended up resulting in a surgery. I had a laparoscopic procedure, which is, the gold standard for diagnosing endometriosis. And I had what's known as an ablation surgery, which is not the gold standard of surgery for this condition. And so I had this surgery. And honestly, a few months later, my endometriosis pain came back and it was more painful than it was prior to the surgery. And so, and I'll pause for a second just to kind of like bet with you guys, but it was a really, really long and confusing and messy journey. You're led to believe that the doctors have the answers and they're going to make you better and they're going to make you feel well. And that just sort of wasn't my experience. And in a way, my journey with epilepsy, which I'll go into further down the line in terms of, where it ended up, which is really positive, and how I came off my medication. But in a way, I've had these very mirroring experiences with I guess my coming to a place of distrust with both my epilepsy and my endometriosis, being this medication that had a really bad impact with my epilepsy, but only being offered two solutions for my endo, which was surgery and birth control. I had the surgery. It failed. I didn't want to take birth control. And so it was kind of like, well, you're not listening to us. You're not taking synthetic hormones. There's nothing that we can do. Which ultimately, has been, I guess, a positive outcome because it's influenced and shaped what I'm doing today. But it was really challenging and I was left in the dark, and I didn't really know where to turn for many years because I started to doubt myself because I was like, do I just have a really low threshold of pain? And so after this surgery, I was really in the dark for a while, still experiencing symptoms, but feeling like no one could help me.
I think a lot of women listening to this are hearing bits of their own story and what you just said of we are told that pain is a normal part of being a woman in general, but also specifically menstrual pain, mood, all of these things. I believed that for so many years. Can you talk a little bit about how you view that now? Like what is, is pain so normal? And then also for anyone who's listening and maybe isn't familiar with endometriosis, can you tell us a little bit more about the endometriosis specifically?
Yes. So endometriosis is a full body systemic inflammatory chronic condition. It can manifest in many different ways. We used to believe it was just a condition that impacted the exterior wall of the uterus or the womb, but essentially it's where tissue similarly to the lining of the uterus grows on the outside of the uterus and can cause very, very severe pain, heavy bleeding, pain, pelvic pain throughout the month, chronic fatigue, low mood, joint pain, hypermobility, insomnia, infertility. And for many women, they get diagnosed too late. And I mentioned before, average diagnosis time is 10 years. And, the real challenge is that if we were able to diagnose this condition sooner, which we should be doing, we've known about this condition for a very, very long time. It affects 10% of women and people with uteruses. Then the outcome for these patients and these women would be very different. And we'll go on to talk a little bit about, Looni's community, but I meet women all the time who have not been able to conceive despite the fact that that's all they wanted. And it was just too late for them. And I think it's just so important when we are talking about this condition and the goal to, why are we advocating? Why am I advocating for this condition? Why do we need more research? Why do we need more funding? It is that is the reason. We need to improve the lives of women who are suffering with this invisible illness. And so that's a little bit about, endometriosis. It can grow these lesions, that actually produce their own estrogen. They can grow anywhere in the body. Again, we used to think it was just specific to the uterus, but we now know it can grow in the bowel. It can grow in the bladder. I meet women all the time, that have found out that their bladders fused to their bowel. It's literally stuck together because of these lesions. Like it's mind blowing. It is really, really mind blowing how severe this condition can be, and how it can impact. I was recently advocating in DC for endometriosis, and I can't tell you how many women there were walking with Zimmer frames. It was absolutely gut wrenching to see women, our age, our generation, that need support walking because of the way the condition has impacted them. And ultimately, we are fading women. I'd say the last few years things have improved, but we still don't have any really good solution to treating this condition. There's a drug going through phase 1 clinical trials right now, which is the non-hormonal drug. I do believe that the way we're starting to treat this condition is changing. It's not just using hormones to sort of suppress estrogen. It's understanding that this is a full body inflammatory condition. I think I want to talk about some of the tools that have, worked for me, because there is a lot to manage this condition. And that's really, really part of what inspired to start Looni and our company.
We're made to think all this pain is normal. For a woman who's listening to this, I guess, what is your view on normal pain, as opposed to, part of life pain versus pain that we should be taking seriously and giving attention to? Because I think a lot of women are told that their pain is that's it for them.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Marissa, and a really, really important question. So, I'll start by saying, yes, we have normalized pain for women. It is unacceptable. A lot of it is rooted in medical misogyny. We gaslit women into thinking that their pain is normal. Menstruation, periods have been taboo for so long. And that adds a layer of, it adds a barrier for young girls to even speak about their pain. A lot of that's, kind of can be cultural influence, how you grew up, but I think for most of us, we've grown up in a world where periods have been taboo, and you see that being more severe, and depending on the different cultures that and have been exposed to and grown up in. And I think, and another reason is just like the lack of research, the lack of funding in women's health. Women weren't required to be in clinical trials, and before, I believe it was 1993. Like that's mind blowing. That wasn't that long ago. We were treated in medicine as just like smaller men. Like, I laugh when I say it because it's just so mind blowing. But like, we are not just smaller men. Like, why will be excluded from clinical trials? This has been so detrimental and damaging to, women's health broadly. Like, we should be so much further on. You just need to look at erectile dysfunction, like, to understand that, the solutions we have. If these issues impacted men, the funding would be so different. You even look at like diabetes, for example. For every dollar that's put behind endometriosis research, $200 is put behind diabetes. And by the way, diabetes is as prevalent as endometriosis. So, you have to ask yourself, well, why do you think that is? Well, endometriosis predominantly affects women. And that's the same. And this is not specific to endometriosis. We see this with fibroids, and we see this with PMDD, and we see this with PCOS. So I think that's the issue there. And I think, because we don't talk about, I don't know about you guys, but like sex education for me, I think back on it, it was learning to put a condom on a banana. That's what I remember learning.
I went to a religious private school, so my sex education was don't do that.
That's as far as it went stretch.
Totally. Yeah.
And I just think like, yeah.
I was just going to say, endometriosis is very prevalent. Endometriosis, PCOS, I think it's 1 in 10 women have one of these conditions. What are some of the warning signs? Because it is very hard to get diagnosed, as you mentioned. What should we look out for? What are some of the symptoms of endometriosis?
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess in a way it sort of connects to like the final part that I was going to say in regards to, this is conversation around normalizing pain. Your pain should not impact you in a way that you are missing work, that you are missing school, that you are having to opt out of activities, that you cannot function. That is not normal. That is not normal pain. So, does it necessarily mean you have endometriosis? No. But, the amount of times, I'm sure this for you guys resonates as well, this is really speaking to any woman, will say, how many friends do you know, or even with yourself, where you'll have just normalized this, oh yeah, it's my period. I need to take X amount of ibuprofen, Tylenol. I usually like stay in bed for like, if I can, the first day of my period. Like, that is not normal. Having extreme when I say pain, this extends the pain. This is and so around your period, this is chronic fatigue. This is debilitating mood where you don't feel like you have the ability to go out and socialize because your self-esteem is so low. Pain during intercourse, it's digestive issues, constipation, or diarrhea. Like, there are so many symptoms that we have just normalized. So I think, Annie, like your point around I guess I want to say, first of all, what we are talking about in terms of this discussion around like, what does a healthy cycle look like? This should be like mandatory part of education for young women. Because I think if we can teach young women what a normal cycle looks like, then they are able to recognize when something isn't normal. And then they are able to go to their physician and have this conversation. So, I think it starts so much younger than these conversations are having. It should start, even before a girl is menstruating, or, around that time. We really need to be unpacking what a healthy cycle looks like. Right now, there is still so much shame around periods and menstruation. Like, there's so many things even around language that we haven't even questioned. For example, you think about period products, right? And you go to the supermarket and they say, oh, the sanitary products are down this aisle, or the, sanitary pads. Like, sanitary, like that implies that like this is something dirty that we're talking about. It's just so crazy. Like, we haven't even like questioned these things as we just don't even realize how entrenched this shame is. But I think in terms of, what are some of the signs? I guess the fatigue, the extreme menstrual pain during intercourse, pain during ovulation, debilitating low moods, joint pain, digestive issues. There are a lot of ways this condition can manifest. And I think this is why it's so important to work with, a good physician, the integrative or functional physician. And unfortunately, not everyone has access to that. And we're playing catch up, right? Because of this big gap with research. And so a lot of doctors, are not even really educated still on endometriosis, on what are the signs of perimenopause. You hear this all the time. This is, again, not specific to endometriosis. How many women do I know that thought they were sick and eventually after, a year or two found out that they were perimenopause and none of their doctors were even recognizing or picking that up.
That's what I also wanted to ask you is what is it's not one size fits all, but what do you do if you do have endometriosis? Because I know that the surgery for it can be effective, especially short term if you're trying to get pregnant in a short window, but the chance of regrowth is very high. So, is there a holistic or functional approach that actually gets at the core of endometriosis and can either slow or reverse the progression of the disease? Quick break before we get back into the episode. If you've ever felt like you've done everything you're supposed to do and you still feel stuck, this is for you. Maybe you've tried the supplements, the protocols, the therapy, the books, the podcasts, the self-development work. And while some of it's helped, something still feels unresolved. Because there's a layer of your health and your life that those things often don't touch. The same pattern shaping your stress, your relationships, your career, your symptoms, and the way you move through the world are way more connected than you think. That's why we built Shift. The Shift method helps women identify the patterns keeping them stuck, work with their nervous system to create lasting change from the inside out. Our one-on-one coaching practice is now open. If you're ready to stop managing symptoms and start getting to the root of what's keeping you stuck, you can book a free consultation through the link in our show notes. And this fall, we're launching the Shift membership, a place to practice the Shift method alongside a community of women doing the exact same work. Together, we'll explore the areas of your life where women get stuck the most often: relationships, career, health, anxiety, purpose, rest, and more, and build the tools to create real, lasting transformation. Join the waitlist today to lock in founder member pricing for life. Now back to the episode.
I love this question. I think to just unpack a little bit around the surgery piece, first of all, because this is really interesting. And this is something that I didn't learn really until a number of years ago, but certainly was not aware of this around the time that I had my surgery, that there are two different types of surgery, right? There's what we call ablation surgery, and then there's excision surgery. Now, ablation surgery is what I had, and that's where the lesions are essentially burnt off top layer. Think of it as mowing a lawn. You mow the lawn, right? Like we cut our hair. Why do we cut our hair? We trim our hair because we want to make it thicker and want it to grow back. We mow the lawn because we want it to be healthy and grow back. So when you burn off the top of these lesions, you're essentially mowing the lawn and these lesions grow back. I have met women where, in a matter of weeks, these lesions have grown back. So ablation surgery is not the gold standard of surgery. It is not the surgery that I would suggest women to have. The issue is kind of insurance and coverage. And again, this was an issue that we were advocating for recently on Capitol Hill, because coverage is often for ablation surgery and not for the other type of surgery, which is known as excision surgery. And so excision surgery is a very, very complex surgery. It takes a lot of time. It can take 7 hours, 11 hours to complete. And it requires very, very specialist specific training. And this surgery is pulling the lesions out by the root. And so there is likely to regrow, Annie, to your point, and is just like, so much more effective than ablation in terms of fertility, in terms of pain, in terms of, fatigue, or a lot of these symptoms that we're talking about. So if anyone was listening and said, okay, I've been told I need surgery, or I think I need surgery, I want to explore that, excision is the gold standard. But again, one of these huge issues that we're having is there are not enough specialist surgeons out there. So we need more surgeons to be trained in this type of surgery. And we need to make sure that there is coverage. There's no coding for this right now. So we need to make sure that we cover this, because otherwise it doesn't incentivize doctors to do this type of surgery. And it's incredibly expensive. So that's the kind of surgery piece. And then to your next question, We don't have a cure for endometriosis, unfortunately. It is an autoimmune condition. It can flare up at different points and times of the month, times of your life. Um, there is a lot that can be done. And, sometimes when I talk about this, I feel like it can be a little bit overwhelming. So I'll just name a few of them. And I think, again, if anyone was listening who just felt overwhelmed by this, I would say, try to start with like picking 2 or 3 tools. So it's just like, you know, it's not overwhelming. Like none of us can be perfect. It's expensive to live with a chronic condition. It's expensive to do all of these different things. So, sometimes it can be really overwhelming and daunting. But some of the tools and things that have definitely helped me is TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, acupuncture, incredible. Chinese herbs can also be really, really beneficial. This can really help with inflammation, fatigue, digestion, a lot of these different symptoms that we've been talking about. Stress management, so key. And I will say probably one of the hardest tools to get a grip of, right? Like we can sort of do a lot of the other things like nutrition and there's much more easily than stress management. Like that's the hardest thing. So I say to people, have you got a mindfulness practice? Maybe that's just a little breath work, box breathing daily at home. Can that be yoga? Meditation. A lot of people say, oh, I can't meditate. I don't know how to meditate. Well, then that's why I just say, what about a bit of breath work, box breathing? Sometimes it's as simple as like, learning. It's like self-care that can be as simple as just like having a bath or a long shower and just making some sort of like calming ritual out of it. Maybe it's a walk in the park, but stress management is always, I guess, the thing that gets overlooked the most, but really, really impacts like high cortisol and chronic stress really impacts inflammation. Another thing is like other botanical supplementation, magnesium, incredible, magnesium glycinate, magnesium citrate, that can be really helpful to calm nervous system, muscle recovery, really helpful for support with digestion. Unfortunately, many women with endo deal with pretty extreme constipation, or often they find that they're going too much. So like in my case, I really, really need a helping hand. So I have to take my magnesium glycinate every night. I'll also take citrate, which is even more beneficial to help with process of elimination. And I'll take that the week prior to my period. Looni supplement that we'll tell you more about soon, but we've got a lot of really, really helpful botanicals in there that can be really supportive for mood, for menstrual pain as well. B vitamins, very helpful for mood support, L-theanine, nutrition, anti-inflammatory diet, gluten-free, incorporating cruciferous vegetables into the diet, really helpful for PCOS, really helpful for endometriosis. I incorporate a lot of flax into my diet. Flax can be really helpful with that process of elimination. Endometriosis means that you're estrogen dominant. So you need some real helping support to make sure that you're not recycling that estrogen back into your system, which means a daily bowel movement. I can't stress that enough. You've got to try to aim for one daily bowel movement. It shouldn't be loose stools, but you want to aim for a nice, healthy daily bowel movement. So flax is your best friend. Amazing. I add it to everything. Like if I cook sprinkle it on the top. If I roast some veggies, I'll put it in with all the herbs and as I'm roasting them, I will put it on my yogurt in the morning. It's such an easy thing to just like throw on top. Making sure that you have enough protein. For a lot of people, let's go back to anti-inflammatory. Dairy can be really inflammatory. I often tell people to start with like a kind of, what do you call it? Sorry, an elimination diet. I often tell people to start with an elimination diet. So you eliminate things and then you bring things back in. Because, for example, I'm absolutely fine with dairy, but I know a lot of women with endo that aren't. So we've got, acupuncture, TCM, we've got stress management, we've got nutrition, movement, moving your body every day, but also understanding how movement affects you. I don't do very well with cardio. That can be a little too much for my system. It can kind of end up causing more inflammation. But if I do cardio, I want to make sure it's at the right time of the cycle, which we can talk about cycle syncing a little bit more, and dig into that a bit more. But, some people find that that's really helpful for them. And some people find lifting weights, it's just figuring out what works with your system and isn't going to cause more inflammation. And then I think community. I think community again is a tool that's really overlooked. Finding your people, finding people that know what it's like to suffer, finding people who are on a similar journey. Maybe they're also navigating and coming up to a set, and you want to talk about how to correct your body. You want to talk about the emotional aspect of waiting 15 years to be diagnosed with this condition. You might be struggling with fertility. You might have recently lost a baby. And we'll talk about Looni's community, but this is one of the reasons that I personally set up Looni's community. So I think these are some of the tools. I'm always encouraging people to figure out ways to calm the nervous system, body work, massage, healing. That might be in the form of Reiki, that might be reflexology, anything that you can do to help calm the nervous system is going to really improve your condition. And then, last tool I'll say is pelvic floor therapy. Pelvic floor therapy, incredible for women with endometriosis. Finding a good pelvic floor therapist can be really, really beneficial. And then I have one more and then I'll stop. Cannabinoids have been incredible to me. I use cannabinoids, CBD and THC. If you don't want to use THC because of the psychoactive elements, CBD is fantastic, anti-inflammatory. It's really helpful with my pain. I use it. I ingest it. I use it topically, and I also use it intravaginally in the form of suppositories. I find that a lot of women don't know that these products are out there. So I really urge people to try them because they took my pain from about a 10 to a 5 when I started using cannabinoids. And I think gut health as well, which, I'll put that under the bucket of nutrition, also really, really helpful. Making sure you're getting enough fermented foods, yogurt, probiotics, etc.
My last question on the tactical endometriosis, and it's okay if there's not an answer to this, but is there a root cause of endometriosis?
That's a great question. They don't know what the root cause of endometriosis is, unfortunately. Do I believe that we should know by now? Yes, but they don't know. They don't know. I think people speculate, but there is no one sort of root cause, unfortunately. You do often see it in families, though. It can be hereditary over the time.
Well, when you were talking about all of the things that you can do to support endometriosis, and these are, I think, the more Annie and I have these conversations with women or specialists in different fields, it can feel overwhelming, especially as a woman, the number of conditions that kind of plague us, so to speak. So many women have gut health issues, fertility issues, endometriosis, PCOS, mental health, physical health, chronic pain, autoimmune, just all of these things. And it feels at times, it can feel very hopeless and like there's just too many things to be done. And I think as I was listening to your list, one of the things that I wanted to basically package what you said as the things you said are true for really anything ever that you're struggling with, which is kind of great. So if you can balance your stress, if you can work on your gut health, if you can move your body, work on nutrition, not be too isolated, be in community, those things do help so many of these different conditions for women, which is, I think, instead of feeling like there's a never ending list of things, it really does come back to those kind of fundamentals of taking care of yourself. And I wanted to double click on the thing you said about community, because I think the connection to maybe many people listening to this, it might seem random, like, oh, okay, fine, maybe I need more support. But we've, in conversations, including not on this podcast together, we've talked about how community is actually, it is medicine. It has a direct impact on your health. You are getting a front row seat to that with the community you're creating at Looni. But I wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about what are you seeing there? Because these health issues are isolating, but I think there's even more to it than just the feeling lonely, I guess.
Yeah, I honestly, Marissa, I love this question so much because it really is like Looni's community is the heart of the business, and community is my heart as well. Like I am such a passionate community builder. And I think oftentimes community gets thrown around in this way that particularly in sort of startup world that refers to you know, like your social community and these things are all community, but I think there's something about finding a group and a forum where you can it comes down to the power of identification, right? It's like finding your people, finding people that really, really understand what you're going through. And I will just, start by saying Looni's community, which is hosted on WhatsApp, it's a totally free community. I started this community myself. Actually, it was nothing to do with the company. I started Looni's community when I was trying to conceive after losing my first baby, which was an ectopic pregnancy. For anyone that doesn't know what an ectopic pregnancy, it's where the fetus begins to develop in the fallopian tube and can't progress, but can be fatal for the mother, for the woman, because it can rupture. And a lot of the time, if you catch it early, there's a medication that you can take. In my case, I didn't catch it early enough, and I had to have my right fallopian tube removed. And it was such a shock. It all happened so quickly. 1 minute I was there being really excited about this scan that I was having, to see my baby on the screen. And I had wanted to, I'd really been on this journey and wanting a baby for so long. And then I was being rushed into surgery. And it was just, within the space of sort of like an hour of walking into the scan. And the next thing you know, I was, being told that I had to rush to hospital and have this emergency procedure. And, I went on to lose another baby after that, different type of miscarriage. I'd say probably more challenging, physically and a completely different experience. I had what's known as a miscarriage. And I, passed the tissue myself. But it's funny because you hear about miscarriage all the time in this quite nonchalant way. And until you've really experienced it, I had no idea how intense the process could be, where, my body was like laboring this fetus. It was so painful. I can't believe I didn't end up in hospital with that one because of the level of pain and bleeding and just how intense and graphic it was. And I was like, no one told me that I was going to see like the fetus pass, and I don't talk about these things in a way that is to be like provocative or to shock, that I just want to like normalize, because it's like we're just saying miscarriage and we don't really talk. It was horrific. It was a horrific, awful, awful experience. And I felt so alone. And at the same time, I was getting invites to everyone's baby shower. My Instagram, like Meta were targeting me with every pregnancy product under the sun, right? Because that was all I was talking about. And I'm so hyper aware when walking down the street. And, obviously the issue here being my endometriosis and not knowing if I was ever going to be able to have a child. And I set up this WhatsApp group without even thinking. And I chucked a bunch of women on there that I knew, it was like, I didn't want to really speak to anyone else because no one else understood family, husband. It's hard for people to understand. All I wanted to do every day was just who understood what it was like. And I was getting so granular in the sense of like, I wanted women who have had one ectopic and one miscarriage, because I just wanted to it's just like seeing your experience, like mirrored. And so, yeah, I started this group. It was purely for like personal reasons, and it just grew and grew. And then like people were finding me through social media because I've been quite vocal about my loss. And then like friends of friends were connecting. And it's just this like beautiful organic blossoming of this space happened. And eventually it ended up becoming, Looni's community. And now it exists, as I say, it's free community. It's broken out into different subgroups. So we have a subgroup for pregnancy loss. We have one for chronic conditions. So, endo, PCOS, fibroids, adenomyosis, PMDD. We have a perimenopause. We have a motherhood and pregnancy, like a pregnancy and postpartum. And am I missing one? I think that's it. Yeah. And then we have a trying to conceive. So anyone who's like maybe going through fertility or egg freezing or struggling to conceive. And it's so beautiful. Like I get so emotional when I talk about it, because it's just like the most incredible and healing tool. And we often say at Looni that we believe physicians should be prescribing community. Here, you need to have an endometriosis excision surgery in June. I want you to go on this medication in the lead up. I want you to have an acupuncture diet. I want you to join a community. It doesn't have to be Looni, like that's, and we've actually just recently started to partner with some incredible partners like Dr. Lou, who's an amazing endometriosis surgery here in New York, also the Lister Hospital in London. So like, this is now, we're feeling really proud about that because it's always been our goal to like get in there with the physician networks. And it's just now these physicians really are like people understand, therapy is incredible. Like we just connected with a psychotherapist, like that's an incredible tool, but it's different to community, it's different to being able to like put something on a community. And so, our community, it's not about medical advice, but I think by the time a lot of particularly endo patients reach our community, they've lost all trust in the medical system. They feel absolutely broken by being repeatedly dismissed and gaslit. And so they need their like trust rebuilding again. And I think they can find that with the community. And it allows them to like crowdsource information, do their due diligence on surgeons. Not all doctors are created equal. As we know, someone might be looking for a doctor that has good bedside manner. So they can find that on the community. They can ask like other people who've had experiences with different surgeons. I think, there is not everyone is a good egg. And I think just being able to like put that to a community on support, I'm currently freezing my eggs. I've just lost a baby. Just feeling that love and support. So, anyone who's listening, like our community is an open door, and it really does help. And you don't have to participate and say anything. You can just observe. A lot of people do that. They come in and they just read the messages and just know that they're not alone ultimately.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. Annie and I are in a complete alignment. That is just so important. And that if every woman had access to a community, the world would be a better place. Our health would be better. And I think the other places community is, in my opinion, it's like definitely for support, but it also shares so much more, to your point, than the medical system shares with us. The medical system seems to fail to acknowledge how significantly women's hormones impact them and what can impact us hormonally. So, for example, when I went off of birth control, I had a horrible, what I now know is hormone crash. No one prepared me for that. I was deep in Reddit threads, didn't know I was sick. I was physically ill, mentally ill. It was horrible. And then I've also now seen some friends go through egg freezing and have no side effects. Others go through egg freezing and have very extreme hormonal side effects. Pregnancy loss is another one where some women go through almost a degree of postpartum depression. And I think from those sudden hormone change in losing a pregnancy. And so I think I've just noticed consistently that doesn't seem to be something we're warned about or is discussed by doctors. And it's, especially watching now friends become moms, friends go through pregnancy. There is so much that they're like, I can't believe no one ever was going to warn me about this. And so I think community can help us fill in the gaps that our medical system are failing to provide us with that information. So you created Looni you had gone through this experience with the healthcare system. You talk about all of these different gaps. We want to specifically talk a little bit more about Looni and the gaps that you are addressing there beyond community.
Yeah, definitely. So community, so I guess product development for us, we developed our second product. So our first product is a supplement, and our second product, which we launched somewhat recently, is a topical for breast, belly, and back tenderness. And we actually tested that product with our community, which was incredible to have that feedback loop with women who were experiencing, this pain point. I mean, specifically around tender breasts being something that just hadn't been solved for. I don't even think many people really discussed it. And that's something that, so many women experience. I, for one, experienced tender breasts in the lead up to my period and then actually found it incredibly uncomfortable. And, we kept hearing this and there weren't any product that specifically breast tenderness. And so we wanted to create this sort of all-purpose anti-inflammatory balm. Well, I say balm, but it's really like a hybrid between a balm and a cream. So it's this really buttery, luxurious texture that like melts on your skin, doesn't leave a sticky film, and is kind of, yeah, like more of like a butter. And getting that texture right, I cannot tell you how long it took. Another thing for us as well, you were talking about some of the things that aren't discussed, Marissa, like, in terms of like the way that we can look after our hormonal health. Um, Fragrance is a huge piece that we're really passionate about talking about at Looni. Fragrance, ultimately, even if it's natural and essential oil, it can be an endocrine disruptor. We as women are using in our household and on our bodies products with endocrine disrupting ingredients in every single day. That's another thing that coming back to originally, we were talking about like tools with endometriosis. That would be another one I would say to people if they're trying to conceive, if they have a chronic menstrual health condition. Cleaning out your home, where we can't all be perfect, right? I love to get a manicure. I'm not going to lie. That is not the best thing for my health. I know that. I get my hair colored. Would I try to skip on the manicures? Yes. Would I skip on the hair dye? Probably not. Like we all have to look, we're all human beings. Like we have to like make our choices. However, I cleared out a number of years ago, cleaning products. We just use vinegar to clean the house. A lot of fragrance I try to stay away from. I actually get fine fragrance can be really overwhelming to me because of my endometriosis. A lot of time women with endometriosis have more sensitive reactions and smells. So I loop back to our topical product. We try to develop a scent profile that was delicate and wasn't overbearing for women with fragrance. And yeah, I urge women to try to use less fragrance, to try to make sure that, there are incredible tools now like the Yuka app where you can actually scan your products. You can scan your SPF. You can see how detrimental to your health some of these products are. And so our topical is a blend of really beautiful, warming, anti-inflammatory, soothing botanicals like ginger and arnica and frankincense. I mentioned breast, belly, back. We also want the act of like applying a topical to the breast to be an act of self-care. Again, when we think about like breast health, and early detection for breast cancer, I'm a BRCA2, a BRCA2 gene carrier, so I have the breast cancer gene. So it's really important for me to do regular breast checks. So we would encourage women to like, even if your breasts aren't feeling tender, that's an act of self-care. Use our product on your breast as a way, it's very soothing, but also to get to know your breast tissue. That whole, if you can incorporate that into your daily goal, that could actually ultimately save your life. A lot of the time women are not actually familiar with their breast tissue. We really encourage women by using our product to try to get intimate with their breast tissue so that if there is a chafe, you will notice that because you are, applying this product, even if you do it in the shower, it doesn't have to be with the Looni product. And then you can also use our product for muscle recovery, which is really nice. And then our supplement is to support hormonal balance. We conducted a clinical study. We looked at menstrual pain. We looked at low mood. We looked at skin breakouts. B vitamins. We have zinc. We have L-theanine, 5-HTP. We have an omega. We have borage oil. And everything is clinically formulated. Both products. Incredible. We have an incredible team of female physicians that we work with, ranging from an OB who's board certified in functional medicine, to a pelvic pain specialist. We have a clinical herbalist on the team. We have one of the few female urologists in America, which is wild. And yes, and so really for us at Looni, it's like, how do we help women establish a toolbox to managing their hormonal health? So our supplement, our topical, are two tools in the toolbox. Community is another tool. And then, today we spoke about so many other tools. What does your toolbox look like? Yours might look differently to mine. Yes, there are many, many like more holistic tools that we can use. Some people do have to take a bioidentical hormone. For example, I take progesterone from day 20 to 28. Progesterone has transformed my cycles. It really helps me with sleep and it really helps me with mood. I am a different person from day 1 to day 20. I'm cruising, follicular phase. I feel good. my body feels good. I've got energy. My mood is good. I'm motivated. My digestion's like kind of okay. The moment I ovulate, everything goes to shit. Like everything falls off. I'm constipated. I feel like I've gained 10 pounds because of the water retention. I have extreme fatigue. My mood is so low that I like, as I lead up to my period and my menstrual phase, like I just doubt everything. I doubt, I start to think whether people like me or not. My self-esteem is just like in the gutter. And so, for me, like that I take bioidentical progesterone, not to be confused with progestin, the synthetic form. And I take a very small dose and I take it from day 20 up into my bleed, transformative for my mood. I take that alongside Looni. I take it at night because it also helps with sleep. They call it nature's Xanax. And it's incredible. So HRT is an amazing tool that can be useful for women, not just through perimenopause, but all women like myself. And so I think it's important to look at all of the tools in the toolbox. And that starts with finding a good physician who knows what they're doing, a good functional physician. We're now seeing a lot of, women's health focused platforms that are really trying to, test women's hormones and have specialists that really understand how to like navigate the world of hormonal health. So I think it starts with finding a really good functional, integrative or, naturopathic physician who can support you.
There's so many things that we can do to support our health, both our mental health, our physical health, our hormone health. And I think I always say this, but our cycles are our fifth vital sign. So they carry so much information and they are so dynamic cycle to cycle. So I also feel like you just shared so many incredible tips, tools, resources that we can use to support ourselves. And it's really important to know too that like if we have one cycle that we have more water retention or we're more fatigued or moody or pain, there's so much we can do that next cycle to make the next one better. We're so dynamic cycle to cycle. And I think that there's so much hope and optimism. And it's almost really empowering to know that we have so much control over feel and the health of our cycles. I would love to wrap by asking you a closing question. You are the queen of embodiment and understanding your body and understanding your cycle and really leaning into these self-care rituals. One of your non-negotiables. What do you do every day to stay grounded and feel your best and support your hormones?
I love this question. I have to try to keep it succinct because, as you can probably tell, I get a little passionate and then I I share too much. Okay, trying to prioritize sleep hygiene. You can't do that 100% of the time. I try to get between 7 and 8 hours sleep because I don't feel well without sleep, my whole body falls off. So that is a good foundational for anyone. Always starting the day with a warm beverage, non-negotiable, before the coffee, before the food, starting with a warm beverage. Coffee doesn't count. So I do like a hot water lemon, or I do a hot hibiscus, I like loose flower, or I do a hot ginger, and it can just be hot water. That's really helpful for digestion, setting yourself up for the day. Also hydration. Else, magnesium. Like cannot travel without my magnesium. Mentioned that before, but if I don't have my regular bowel movement, I will feel awful. So I have to make sure that I take my daily magnesium, and I'll take different dosages depending on where I'm at in the cycle. There are so many more, and I love this question. I could literally give you 10 more, but I'll stop there.
That was amazing. Well, thank you, Chelsea. We so appreciate you coming on. You shared just a wealth of knowledge, tips, insights, and we so appreciate it. Where can everybody find you?
Thank you so much for having me. They can find me on social at Chelsea Leyland. Also on Substack as well, Body Language. Then they can find Looni, which is at my.looni. And our website is looni.com.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, and we will talk to you soon.
Thank you so much.
If something in today's conversation resonated with you, take a moment to pause and notice where it's sitting within you.
Living in alignment is not about fixing yourself or becoming someone new. It's about listening, trusting, and slowly coming home to who you already are.
Thank you for spending this time with us and for being part of this community.
If you enjoyed this episode, you can subscribe, leave a review, or share it with someone who might resonate with it too. See you next time.